Good morning. And so nice to see you all here after all this yesterday's gala. And I would like to then give you a presentation on behalf of me and Hedi, who unfortunately can't be here today. And it's based from my master thesis, which I defended last year in the Estonian Academy of Arts. Firstly, I would like to give you a short overview of the history and restoration history of the altarpiece. The Passion Altarpiece in Nationalmuseum Museum in Tallinn has an intricate and interesting history, which has made it an intriguing research object for art historians over the centuries. The authorship of the altarpiece, dated to the first quarter of the 16th century, is unknown, but it has been mostly associated with the circle of Adrian Isenbrandt or Albert Cornelis. Probably Netherlandish in its origin, the altar table has been overpainted several times. In the 16th century, its function changed and it came to be used as an epitaph. Over the course of its history, changes have been to the appearance of the altarpiece on at least 7 occasions. The open triptych depicts the story of Christ's Passion. The outer wings present the Virgin Mary with the Christ child, the Apostle James the Greater, Saint Adrian, and Saint Antony the Great. Currently visible figures, which are in several occasions attributed to Michael Sittow, were probably painted in the first quarter of the 16th century. Originally, the outer wings depicted 4 Franciscan saints instead. In the mid-16th century, the altar table was turned into an epitaph, and praying figures of Heinrich Bock and Urban Dehn appeared on the central panel of the table. In 1654, Urban Dehn the Younger commissioned the renovation of the epitaph, and his figure was added to the right shutter. At the beginning of 17th century, after it had been turned into an epitaph, the retable was given a polychromed carved pediment depicting the resurrection scene and 2 allegorical figures to further emphasize its new function. It is unknown who ordered this change, but it could have been descendant of Urban Dehn. The next change occurred in the 19th century, when for unknown reasons the donor portraits in the central panel were overpainted, and therefore the initial composition of the crucifixion scene was restored. Historical photos show that the triptych was located in the St. Anthony Chapel at that time. In 1944, the artworks from St. Nicholas Church were evacuated to Järlepa Manor House in the fear of war. After the re-evacuation, the altarpiece was stored once again in the chapel of St. Anthony, although the church was severely damaged by March bombing. St. Antony Chapel was one of the few intact areas of the church at that time. In 1958, the altarpiece was transferred to the Tallinn State Art Museum in order to ensure better conditions for its preservation. In the 1960s, the central panel and shutters were separated. Amongst the other medieval sculptures, the shutters were placed in the permanent exhibition in the banquet hall of the Kadriorg Palace. Probably, the central panel was also stored in the museum facilities, waiting for the much-needed restoration works to start. After a branch of Art Museum of Estonia was established in St. Nicholas Church in 1984, the wings were brought back at the church. The 2 wings were exhibited side by side without the central panel in the middle. The altarpiece was rejoined only in 1996. Up to now, the research on the altarpiece has focused mostly on the painted panels. The aim of this paper is, however, to shed light on the less researched side of the object. Historically, only brief references have been made to the retable's pediment in various art historical sources, mentioning its date, depiction, and presumable author. Deposited in the Art Museum of Estonia's collection, the pediment has been in need of attention for years, due to the extremely poor condition of its paint layers that were very loose and falling off, as well as covered with heavy layers of dust and dirt. The originally colorful pediment has been repeatedly overpainted with brown paint. The date of these works is unknown. However, this has changed the appearance of the pediment considerably. Over the last decades, the restoration treatment has been under discussion a number of times, but due to the level of work needed and the intricate conservation dilemma, the restoration works never had been carried out. The last restoration treatment was carried out by Caroline Walter in 1940, a few years before its evocation. In her restoration report, Walter wrote following: "In addition to the restoration of the paintings entrusted to me, I have cleaned, repaired, filled, and in-painted the wooden decoration placed on top of the central panel. Presumably, since the evacuation, the pediment was separated from the altarpiece. In 1990s, facing papers were applied as a temporary solution for stopping further degradation of the paint layers on the pediment. An intriguing question has been how to determine the best concept for conserving an object that is critically damaged and covered with secondary paint layers that have significantly altered its appearance. The decision had to be made about how to conserve the pediment when the larger context and meaning of the altarpiece as a whole had to be considered. In order to formulate the treatment goals, research was conducted on the history of the artwork, its iconographical background, and the potential influences that may have inspired the author creating the artwork. When examining the decorative forms of the resurrection scene and its allegorical figures, it seems the composition can be dated to early 17th century. Pediment's central panel depicts the resurrection scene with Christ holding cross banner in his hand. Though through iconographical analysis, it appears that similarities can be found with the Pontus de la Gardie tombstone epitaph by Arend Passer in Tallinn Cathedral, Albert Dürer's engraving Resurrection, and indirectly even with engravings of Lucas Cranach's altarpieces. If thinking of the mentality of the era, it can be imagined that the exact replication of the examples was not intended while creating the pediment. Rather, the author has probably used different examples as references, combined them, and accomplished the artwork according to his creative capabilities. Two allegorical figures representing virtues, prudence with a mirror on the left and fortitude on the right, stand in the niches on the side panels. Sten Karling, a noted art historian, has attributed the Passion Altarpiece pediment to Berent Geistmann, a carver who worked for the Church of St. Nicholas during this period. Originating from Netherlands, Geistmann represented the tradition of Low Countries and enriched the local wood carving with the decorative mannerist forms and style. A comparison was made between the pediment and other artworks attributed to Berent Geistmann. Although many similarities can be found, it is still only a stylistic attribution and not based on archival sources. Before the conservation works, the pediment was covered with thick layers of dust and dirt. The finishing layers had become brittle and they largely detached from wood and ground. Taking into account the state of the object, consolidation of the finishing layers was unavoidable. All this had to be kept in mind when determining the final conservation concept, and various different approaches considered in order to find the ideal and realistic solution. In order to find a compromise between the theoretical aspirations and practical considerations, a decision was taken to conserve and stabilize the Passion Altarpiece pediment with all its historical layers. In addition to the theoretical and technical questions already presented, an important factor was the possibility of reconstructing the original polychromy layer independently from the physical object itself. As the conservation decision preserved all the historical stages of the pediment, it was decided that the original color scheme would be reconstructed digitally. The chosen concept at the same time leaves a hypothetical opportunity to remove the brown overpaintings in the future if it's needed or desired. taking into account the potential opening of the original polychrome in the future and weighing the fact that is an object currently stored in the collection, even a neutral retouching was not executed. However, this doesn't mean that it might not be executed in the future. The extensive and time-consuming conservation treatment included cleaning and fixing loose and brittle finishing layers simultaneously, removing of facing papers, and overall cleaning of the front and the back side. The fixation process was complicated due to the extensive amount of unattached finishing layers, the intricate form and shape of the object, object. Simultaneously with the conservation treatment, original polychromy research was conducted and paint samples for cross-sections were taken. Here you can see some photos of before and after the conservation. There are no images of the original state of the pediment as it appears to be overpainted in all of the historical photographs. It is known that strongly colored skin tones, rich gilding, and fabric luxuriously executed in colorful luster techniques were characteristics of early 17th century polychromy. Color glazes in general are transparent coatings that are applied on the burnished metal gildings to imitate precious materials, such as gemstones or costly techniques with relatively inexpensive methods. Although the technique was known for centuries, the use of color glazes on polychrome wooden sculpture became especially beloved in the 17th century. Large surfaces were covered with the metal leaf gildings and glamorized with the red, green, yellow, or blue glazes, creating special luminous effects by reflecting the light through the lacquer from the metallic surface underneath. In this period, the highly burnished water gildings were varied with oil gilding to achieve a wide range of optical effects in combination with color glazes, which could be then transferred to semi-opaque. As it appeared that much of the pediment's original polychromy was scraped or washed off before repainting it, and it became obvious that we couldn't ascertain the coloration of all the different details, and it was time to look for comparisons. Considering the fact that the original polychromy of the pediment had only survived partially under the overpaintings, in the research of comparative materials, we turned our attention to objects from the same era. Nevertheless, it must be recognized that it's not so easy to find a polychrome object from the early 17th century with their initial color intact. They are either destroyed or repainted during the past centuries, similar to this one. St. Nicholas Church in Tallinn had been one of the most richly furnished churches from this period, but unfortunately, the majority of the interior was destroyed in the fire caused by the bombing of Tallinn in 1944. An idea of a possible impact of the original colors can be imagined when looking at the pulpit of Tallinn's Church of the Holy Spirit. Then the polychrome of the side altar of St. Ulrich and St. Arfa Abbey in Augsburg, which with its marbling, rich gilding, and dominant red and green lustering might be a typical example of the polychromy of the early 17th century. Although this has been extensively reconstructed in the late 1950s, based on the initial color scheme, so it's not original at the moment. The original color scheme of the Passion Altarpiece pediment was partly revealed by previous cleaning areas and losses in the finishing layers. For better understanding of the structure of the finishing layers, stratigraphic research and pigment analysis were carried out. The research revealed that the original polychromy is applied on a chalk ground with tempera as binder, and common 17th century pigments were used. For example, a blue pigment on the pediment identified as malt also coincides with the era as it started to replace the formerly widely used azurite at the end of the 16th century. Historically, matte color areas were combined with areas covered with gold and silver leaf and color glazes applied on them. All this is evidence how colorful and gleaming and the now brown pediment once used to be. And here are some examples of the different pigments. In order to learn more about the original color scheme, besides visual examination, cross-sections and micro-openings were made. The final stage of the research and conservation treatment was to visualize the original color scheme and create a digital reconstruction. It was decided to create a digital, two-dimensional reconstruction of a color scheme. Firstly, all areas where traces of pigments were found were marked on the reconstruction. But taking into account the symmetry of the object, the results could be transferred to similar details as well. Since the pediment was rather damaged, it turned out impossible to determine the original pigment tones in all the areas. These areas were left as the background gray. Color shades used in the reconstruction do not follow the pigment tones precisely, but just give a hypothetical idea how the pediment once could have looked like or appeared. In addition to this reconstruction, a 3D model of the pediment was created in collaboration with Andres Uueni, and partial color application was tested. This can be considered as one of the possible options for presenting the pediment in the Niguliste Museum as part of the Passion Altarpiece history in the future, as it's no longer possible to exhibit the pediment in its original location and position on top of the altarpiece itself. Considering the heightened interest in the altarpiece related to the upcoming Michael Sittev exhibition and the examination and conservation of the panels conducted within this framework, perhaps it may be possible sometime in the future to create an interactive solution that would show the various historical stages of the Passion Altarpiece altogether. In addition to creating this digital reconstruction, as a result of this master project, the condition of the pediment of the Passion Altarpiece has been conserved and stabilized. This means that it may be possible to actually exhibit the pediment in the future if wished. Hopefully, it will be possible, at least temporarily, this year in the Niguliste Museum, where a day dedicated to introduce the Passion Altarpiece is planned to be organized. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kaisa-Piia. Very interesting presentation. Has anybody some questions to Kaisa-Piia? Colleagues? No, then I have one question. Can I ask you, which kind of methods did you use for research of polychromy? You have some words?
Mm-hmm. So it was mostly for the polychromy. Much was seen thanks to the losses and the previously made cleaning areas that were already on the object, but also for the pigments, we executed quite a lot of stratigraphical research in the sense that we made micro openings, and so little stratigraphical search was the most common, and also a lot of cross sections were taken, so little paint samples.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.